CBDCs, of course, are controversial for all good reasons. The tech is sort of amoral. It's just technology, but used in the wrong ways, it can result in
Hello, amazing people of Web3, crypto, and blockchain. We're coming in live from Voice of Crypto with another really, really exciting guest. Today, we are really excited to have with us Mance Harmon. He is an experienced technology executive and entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience in strategic leadership. He has experience with MNCs, government agencies, high-tech startups. He's the co-founder and CEO of Swirl's INC, and also and he also co-founded Hedera Hashgraph. Ex-US Air Force, national defense, cybersecurity, and the feathers in your hat are countless, Mance. I would love to hear a lot more about you, about your journey in this space. So just if you could talk about yourself, how did you land up in this space? How has, I know it's a long, long time, but how have the last 20 years looked for you?
Oh, well, it's been a great journey. As you noted already, it sort of started with the military, early experience in machine learning. My co-founder, Dr. Leemon Baird, who is part of the Hedera project, he invented Hashgraph, which I'm sure we'll talk about. He and I met back in '93 doing research for the senior executive in machine learning for the Air Force, doing research on a team of 5. And we've worked together ever since. And so a long time in the military doing deep tech, missile defense, which was really interesting. Managed a big program for the Missile Defense Agency. And then for the past 20 years plus, we've been entrepreneurs, done multiple startups, and we got involved in this space in the real work started in about 2012 or 2013, but then formally created Swirls in 2015, and then Hedera Hashgraph in 2017. And here we are years later. Hedera is now a major project, one of the leading layer ones out there, and there's still a lot of work to do. But that's been the journey.
Absolutely. So you were absolutely right when you said that we are going to talk about Hedera a lot more. Mm-hmm. And that in fact is my first question. If you could talk about how you and Dr. Leemon Baird invented Hashgraph back in 2017, how did the idea sort of come to you? And how did you go through with the entire process of inventing this layer one?
Yeah, well, so Leemon and I have always worked together on the technology, but I'll be the first to say that I am not Leemon's equal. And so I have focused on the business aspects of our relationship while he solved the most difficult problems, including this one. And the problem specifically that he was attempting to solve, was this, there's always been a trade-off between security and performance in distributed consensus algorithms, which of course are the algorithms that create the world of blockchain, enable the world of blockchain for us today. And in 2012, he just went to work. It's a simple math problem, or at least you can state the problem simply. It's a hard problem to solve. And he worked on that for a few years. And in 2015, eventually did solve that problem. And what that means is that he achieved the theoretical limit in terms of what can be achieved for security in a consensus algorithm. It's something called asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerance, or ABFT. It's a technical term. The academics all understand that to mean you can't do any better in terms of security in the consensus algorithm, while simultaneously maximizing performance in such a way that it makes it possible to scale a massive layer one blockchain. And so he sort of cracked that nut, as it were, in 2015, and that led to the creation of everything that we've done to date.
Mm-hmm. So it won't be wrong to say that Hedera doesn't function like a traditional blockchain, and what you did out there was something out of the box. It's not the typical blockchain that we were accustomed to, and it employs a different structure. I read about it. It's called DAG. If you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Well, so when we think about blockchain, as sort of created in the Bitcoin blockchain is a template that a lot of other blockchains use. That's includes both a data structure as well as a consensus algorithm. The data structure is a chain of blocks of transactions, and there's a consensus algorithm that lets the miners come to an agreement or consensus on which block to put on top of their local copy of the blockchain. So they all stay in consensus on the order of transactions. With DAGs and Hashgraph, there is both a data structure, and that is the directed acyclic graph that you've mentioned, the DAGs. There are a number of chains out there that use DAGs as a way of representing the transaction history or the information in the system. And then separate from that data structure, there is a consensus algorithm. In other words, the algorithm makes it possible for all the nodes in the network to come to agreement about what's being represented in that data structure, the DAG. So there are a number of chains out there. I call them chains. There are a number of projects, layer ones, that use DAGs, but none of them use DAGs with the Hashgraph consensus algorithm. So again, a DAG is just a way of storing information or representing information. The important part is how you make all the nodes come to agreement or consensus and make sure that that achieves the limits of security that we've talked about. So it's just, IOTA is an example of a famous DAG out there. We're DAG. We use a DAG, but they couldn't be further apart in terms of consensus algorithms, and that's what's important.
Understood. Another one of Hedera's unique selling point is its ability to address blockchain trilemma. If you could talk a little bit about what exactly that is, why it was feared, and how Hedera exactly overcame that.
Well, there are three sort of competing interests when designing a network like ours, a distributed consensus network. You want it to be decentralized. You also want it to have the best security one can achieve, and you need it to be scalable. And typically, you end up having to prioritize, one or more of those over the others. You can't maximize, by some definition of maximization or optimization, all three simultaneously. So that's certainly going to be true for all layer ones or all consensus algorithms. It's not something that you can solve. I mean, it's sort of a truism in the math. What we've done and what others attempt to do is push the boundaries on what can be achieved practically in all three dimensions at the same time. And so in terms of decentralization, we have fantastic decentralization. It has everything to do with the Hashgraph consensus algorithm. We can ensure that there is good decentralization, both in terms of ordering the transactions in the network, which is really what the trilemma is concerned with. But then we also have good decentralization and governance. The security is what I've said. We achieve the theoretical limit of security. You can't do any better than that in that dimension. And for scalability, we are able to do that as well. And it has to do with the fact that it is an ABFT algorithm. And let me just put it in simpler terms. If it's the case that you can achieve the limit of what can be achieved, the ABFT limit, that's sort of a foundational building block, sort of a brick that you use then to build your house. And if you're starting with that brick, then the house that you can build is going to look very different than if you don't start with that brick. And because of that, we're able to scale in some fundamental ways that any other algorithm out there simply can't. and it's very technical, but it's the truth. So we're able to both scale fundamentally to massive scale while maintaining security and also being maintaining that decentralization, and it has everything to do with the hash graph consensus algorithm.
Really interesting analogy, and I don't think anyone could have explained it to me better than you, because I read it and I have been a journalist for so long and I've written stuff on this, but yet the way you explain it, flawless. My next question would be that it has been quite some time since you invented Hedera back in 2017, and now times have changed. I'm sure there are other projects that have managed to not exactly do the same, but maybe attempt to do the same. So how has Hedera sort of been in terms of competition, or how have you scaled from then to now, and what sort of what things have changed the most in terms of ecosystem or development?
Well, from the very beginning, we focused on really large scale use cases because we're able to have really high performance, which then in turn results in ultra low cost. I mean, here's the thing between, early Bitcoin and Ethereum can process 7 transactions per second for Bitcoin, 15 for Ethereum. Okay. If that's the case, if you're limited to that number of transactions per second, then the cost per transaction, because of the demand, is going to be enormous. And this is exactly what we're seeing with Ethereum. We can process today, we have capacity to process today 10,000 transactions per second, which results in ultra low cost, and it's denominated in dollars, not HBAR. HBAR is the token associated with our project. When developers use the network, they can count on, they know what the dollar cost is going to be for every API call. So that makes it possible for them to predict what their cost of goods is going to be. But you take that combination of features and the security, et cetera, and you can build out massive use cases with really high volume of transactions that you simply cannot do on Ethereum. So we focus there, and the result of that is that we've got large enterprise. We haven't talked about the governance of Hedera, but the governing body is made up of global enterprise organizations, the biggest companies in the world, and it's enterprise governing a global network for enterprise grade use cases. Now, what's changed since 2017 when we kicked off Hedera is that both the enterprise is now beginning to go to market with those solutions, and the other layer ones in the market have recognized as much, and they're now focused on enterprise use cases. So, we started there. We've been well positioned to address it. We address all the concerns of the most rigorous use cases, and the market is now catching up.
I'm sure there's the first movers advantage that you've always had. There have been a lot of regulatory challenges that the Web3 industry as a whole has had to face. And we spoke about HBAR just now. Have there been any concerns around HBAR sort of facing any sort of regulatory scrutiny, or were there any concerns at some point? If so, how did you sort of address them?
Yeah, well, this is another thing that we've done very differently than most of the other layer ones out there. From the very beginning, we decided that we would be regulatory friendly, and this was back in 2017. When when all of our peers were saying, if you're going to do this, don't do it in the United States. Be domiciled in some other jurisdiction. They're their favorite jurisdictions back then. They sort of change over time. But we made the decision back then to be domiciled in the United States. We're a Delaware-based corporation. It's an LLC. All of these companies that are on the governing council, Google and IBM and Deutsche Telekom and Nomura and on and on and on, they are members of this LLC. And we engaged actively the SEC way back in 2017. So I've always believed that it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to sort of change your stripes in midstream. In other words, you can't play fast and loose with the regulations and then hope that later on you can reverse course and become regulatory compliant after the fact. That doesn't work well. And so from the beginning, we've started playing that way. We've been very regulatory conscious, and that has that set us up again to be one of the best positioned layer ones in the market today.
Interesting. The first quarter of this year wasn't very bright for a lot of firms. However, for Hedera, the TVL, if I'm not wrong, so quarter-on-quarter growth. Dell Technologies joined the governing council as, I think, the 28th member. However, there was one, I think, roadblock, which was the security breach, wherein I think there was a bug in a smart contract service code, which was exploited. So since then, I think we're 2 more quarters down. Has Hedera faced a similar issue? And what were your sort of first 8 steps back then? How did you guys overcome that situation?
Yeah. So the simple answer is no. There have been no other breaches. In fact, that's the only breach that I recall since we've started. And yeah, there was a bug in the smart contract service. So the immediate response was for the staff of Hedera, the council members and the appropriate committees, and our staff that is involved to quickly address the situation. We then brought in members of the ecosystem, including the DEXs that were impacted, and we recreated the exploit in sort of a white hat fashion and addressed that with the DEXs. And then the council voted to update the code base, and we applied that patch to the code base to remove the exploit. So it was we were able to basically minimize the impact of the exploit. I think there was $600,000 lost, but it's a terrible thing to lose $600,000. But I'm kind of proud of the fact that we didn't lose what many of our peers have lost, right, in similar situations, and we were able to take care of it in short order.
So kudos on that, and also congratulations on the recent drop with Fednow that happened, and it was quite a major step, especially looking at something like this happening in the United States. So how do you think, how will the integration of Hedera's drop with Fednow impact the wider cryptocurrency ecosystem? It did play sort of well for the positive narrative for the entire industry, but how do you think it will impact this going forward?
Yeah. Well, so what I see is sort of the financial services or financial aspects of the crypto market continuing to grow more mainstream, and Drop is a great example of that. Sushil Prabhu, CEO of Drop, has done a great job growing and building out that product line. They haven't yet gone to market. My understanding is that they expect to go to market either the end of this year or Q1. And what was interesting and exciting is that Fednow made the decision to list that product on their marketplace. And it was the first crypto product of its kind listed on the marketplace. What it will do, what they do, or when they launch, is make it possible both to use crypto or USD. And Hedera is the rails for the crypto. And when they're using USD, the rails that are provided by Fednow for USD, then Hedera is the audit trail for all the transactions. And so crypto is providing value. There's value added services to the Fednow offering. And this is just the first step towards further integration and sort of normalization of crypto in the mainstream financial services world.
Absolutely. So if we talk about the recent integration, how do you think this would transform the micropayments and digital transaction space, and also the wider payment technology landscape?
Yeah, well, when it comes to micropayments, technology has been one of the roadblocks historically. Micropayments don't work if it costs a quarter or even a nickel to complete a transaction. if it's the case that the cost to complete a transaction is, say, a penny of a penny, a hundredth of a cent, which is the cost, the hard cost to do an HCS transaction on our network, then there are just a lot of use cases that open up that really could not be addressed before. And it can all be programmed. It's just programmatic in sense of workflows. When you build out the workflows for whatever the use case might be, it can all be integrated into your solution in sort of a seamless way. And so I think micropayments, the time for micropayments may be coming. They certainly could solve a lot of the friction points and problems that we see and paywalls and other things today. But the technology is now here, and with the advancement of stable coins, for example, and other digital, just tokenization generally, in combination with integration into mainstream financial services and financial rails, I think that that they're going to realize their full potential.
Absolutely. And talking about tokenization, what are your views on CBDCs, and what do you think the future holds for CBDCs? A lot of countries have already launched their pilots. Some already have their CBDCs. So what do you envision the future like for CBDCs?
Well, CBDCs, of course, are controversial for all good reasons. The tech is sort of amoral. It's just technology, but used in the wrong ways, it can result in the detriment, a detriment to the populations, and populations typically are concerned about how governments might use the technology, and so they are controversial. What I would hope, so it is possible, by the way, it is possible to build CBDCs in such a way where you can protect the privacy and liberties of people, but they have to be done. It has to be designed in upfront, and the hope is that the ones that are making such decisions are including us, the industry that has the expertise when doing all of that design work. And it's going to end up spanning government agencies. To do it correctly, you have to do it across government agencies. So I don't know what's going to end up happening with CBDCs. What I do think is interesting and will happen is this notion of tokenized bank deposits. So you have dollars or fiat generally, and you're putting that into your savings account or your checking account at the bank, and you're getting in return tokens that have special properties and special uses and use cases. And, they're just another form of stable coin in the technical sense. And so I do think that will happen and will go mainstream. We're already seeing some signs of that more in Europe than in the United States, regulators opening up to that sort of thing. And it'll be another step in the direction of mainstreaming tokenization with existing infrastructure and participate. Governments participating in this ecosystem.
Absolutely. Talking about the regulatory landscape, can you give a comparison of United States versus the global other geographies? Also, if you could talk about the key challenges that Web3 entrepreneurs would sort of face in terms of regulations.
Well, so the United States is and continues to be behind many other jurisdictions. That's a problem. It's certainly a problem. When we started all of this back in 2017, I would not have guessed that 6 years later in 2023, we would still be where we are today in the United States. So that's a challenge for sure. Unfortunately, in the United States, it has become very partisan. Everything seems to be partisan these days in the United States, and crypto is no different in that regard. That's a problem. and it shouldn't be, right? I mean, the United States needs to compete on a global stage, and there is regulatory arbitrage happening. There are companies leaving the United States to go to more crypto-friendly jurisdictions. Now, how does it affect the entrepreneur? Well, I see it all the time. I mean, and I've dealt with it. You know, I've dealt with it personally for 6 years. Being in our situation, the regulatory landscape was always front and center in our decision-making process. And when there is no clarity about the regulatory landscape, you know, you have a choice. You sort of disregard, or you build in such a way that you try to protect yourselves in the worst case, right? Because you don't know which direction it's going to go. And that comes at a cost. If you are conservative and try to build in such a way that in the worst case, the regulatory environment moves against you, well, you know, how do you prevent that from destroying the project? That comes at a cost, especially when competing with others that don't care, right? And just will take the risk. So there are all kinds of trade-offs. And I also see entrepreneurs not pursuing projects that they would otherwise pursue if there was regulatory clarity, because, you know, especially in some cases, and well-deserved perhaps in some cases, the regulators are going after the founders, right? And so it's, you know, it's not without consequence, and clarity would just make it possible for all of us to do, the entrepreneurs to do what they do best, and that is go and create goods and services that bring real value to the world. And I think everything is sort of on pause in some ways in certain jurisdictions until we get that clarity.
Unfortunately, yes. So talking about, I think, good conscience, you, or at Hedera, you guys have always sort of managed to address big problems that other firms weren't able to. One of them being that Hedera sort of managed to be carbon neutral, and still has, if I'm not wrong. So, how did the thought come to you, being in a space where, you know, back then, Bitcoin mining used to be criticized so much for its energy consumption? So how did you guys sort of battle that problem and come up with the entire concept of a carbon neutral layer one?
Well, it turns out that coincidentally, if you solve this technical problem that I've described, optimizing both performance and security simultaneously, until you have really fantastic performance, you solve the carbon problem as well. And so we kind of got it for free in the invention of Hashgraph. And what it looks like as a result is that the cost, not just the cost per transaction is tiny, the energy consumption that is required per transaction is tiny. The two kind of go hand in hand, right? Your hard costs are a function of your real hard costs. So if you're not using much energy or CPU cycles or hard disk or whatever, and then both the costs are going to be low and the energy usage is going to be low. And what that looks like today is, on a per transaction basis, we have the lowest carbon usage of any of the layer ones, easily, hands down. And we even are 70 times more efficient from a carbon perspective than Visa is on a on a transactional basis. So if I swipe my card at a point of sale system, I'm using 70 times more electricity, or carbon, I should say. Actually, it's electricity in this case, than on a per transaction basis on Hedera. So we have benefited from that. Of course, we care about that. The result of that is that there's now a large ESG community that has built up and grown on top of Hedera. We have software that's specific to the ESG community that is being used. That's called the Guardian, that is being used by that community. And if you're a company building a product or service and you have to take into consideration the carbon footprint of your suppliers, the vendors that you're using to build those products and services, then you really, and you're using blockchain, then you really care about this, and you would want to go with us to keep your total carbon footprint down, and we just have the perfect solution for that.
Absolutely. So how do you envision the future of Hedera Hashgraph, and what would be the sort of key goals or milestone for the next 18 months or so?
Well, so we have largely delivered on most of all the technical aspects of the platform. There's still a few things to do, and we'll do them, of what we predicted back in 2017. There's still a few things to do, and we'll continue to deliver on those. But we've now begun to focus on how to remove friction from the process of developing a solution to go to market. So developers out there, whether you're a startup or you're an enterprise, it's still the case that it can take a while to build out a dApp and go to market with that solution. We're now sort of moving up the stack. We're building additional tools and software that run on top of Hedera that the developer community can then in turn use to reduce how long it takes for them to build out a solution. A couple of quick examples is the Guardian service that I just mentioned. It makes it possible for anyone that wants to track their carbon footprint for whatever products or services they're building, and then turn around and mint emissions tokens easily, quickly. Or on the other side of the equation, if you're doing something that saves energy and you want to emit carbon credits or offsets, the Guardian makes it possible to do that seamlessly, quickly, easily, just by integrating that software into your product. That's one example. Another example is with stablecoins. So our earliest members in the banking industry that did stablecoin POCs, it would take several months, maybe 4, 5, 6 months to build out that solution, along with integrations of third parties that are part of the solution, third-party infrastructure custodians and analytics providers, security folks, etc. Now we have the Stablecoin Studio that we just launched about a month ago, and literally within a day, you can launch a full hardened stablecoin solution that includes all of those third-party integrations. So that's what I'm talking about, removing the friction from the process of building and going to market with the developer solution is where the focus is. And that's just going to accelerate both adoption of Hedera and adoption of the crypto industry as a whole. Web3, the migration from Web 2 to Web 3 on the part of mainstream.
Absolutely. And since you just mentioned, this would have been my last question, but since you mentioned the migration from Web 2 to Web 3, how do you envision the future for this migration itself? And do you think the way we interact with the internet would essentially change?
So I think that for the end user, I anticipate the way that we as end users interact with the internet probably is not going to change a lot. I mean, user interfaces will improve. The point is for the end users not to even be aware that they're using blockchain under the hood, right? They shouldn't have to learn a lot of new stuff to take advantage of the value that is in the use of DLTs, distributed ledger technologies. But for those that are building out the solutions, they're going to extract the value. They're going to realize the value, and whether it's supply chain management and interfacing supply chains, the tokens associated with widgets that are flowing into supply chains, and tokens, digital twins of the products being manufactured and developed through the supply chain from manufacturer to distributor to reseller to consumer, and the interfacing of those tokens, the associated tokens, with the financial system, the DeFi equivalent, whether it's DeFi properly, I mean, as we know it in sort of Web3 DeFi, or it's CeFi, centralized finance, that has built out in their tech stack support for digital tokens based on what they're seeing happening in the DeFi world, right? That interface then with supply chains, for factoring of ARs, accounts receivable, or getting capital loans against the tokens associated with products, et cetera, et cetera. All of that is happening on the back end in sort of a big enterprise context. And on the front end, we need to migrate away from, when I say migrate, on the front end, we want the user interfaces to the consumers of the world to change incrementally and very little. And that's a challenge that we as an industry have today. The user interfaces and user experiences with Web3 still are bad as a rule, right? If you don't know anything about computers, then you're not going to be in Web3. It's just too complicated. So the UX and UI has to improve, and the infrastructure that's on the back end needs to continue developing and growing together over time. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that happen in Hedera with the use cases being built out on top of us. And we're seeing improvements in certain areas in UI and UX as well.
Absolutely. And I'm only optimistic about the future. And I hope that things do change for the better, which with projects like Hedera, it is sure to happen. Thank you so much for those lovely insights, Mance. And it was our pleasure to have you here on Voice of Crypto today. For anyone who's missed parts or more than that of this live session, we will be posting an episode on Voice of Crypto's YouTube channel, and we'll be tagging Mance. So you can go ahead and check it out later if you want to as well. This was a really insightful session for me, and I'm sure for everyone who joined. So thanks a lot once again, Mance, for making this possible and joining us today. This was Varuni Trivedi from Voice of Crypto. Once again, big thank you. Big shout out to Hedera and you, Mance.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.